A worthless painting, that's what her family called it. Then one UV flashlight revealed a hidden code, and behind it enough evidence to destroy a billion-dollar empire. Watch till the end. Subscribe now.
My name is Ashley. I'm 30 years old, and the day my parents' will was read, I learned exactly what they thought I was worth. The attorney's voice was steady as he listed everything that went to my older brother first. The house, the investment firm, the vacation properties, the cars, the accounts that added up to more money than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. My brother leaned back like he was trying on a crown, lips curling into that little smirk he'd worn since we were kids. Then the attorney cleared his throat and said, "And to our daughter Ashley, my heart actually jumped just for a second. Maybe there was something, anything that said I mattered, too." We leave the painting titled Silent Tides from Margaret's office. That was it. A single painting. My mother liked to stare at when she worked late. No house, no shares, no cash, just a piece of canvas everyone else had always ignored. My brother glanced at me, fighting a laugh. "Guess that's all you deserve," he murmured, low enough that only I and the attorney could hear. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say a word. I could have snapped back, could have begged for an explanation, could have asked why the child who never missed a hospital visit, who held their hands at the end, walked away with nothing. Instead, I swallowed hard, stared straight ahead, and said, "Okay." The attorney slid a folder toward me, reminding me I had a few days to pick up the painting before the house officially changed hands. I walked out of that office with empty hands and a head full of questions, believing my parents had left me a worthless painting while my brother got millions. I had no idea that inside that worthless painting was a secret that would have my entire family pounding on my door, screaming for me to give it back. If you think the cruelest thing parents can do is leave their daughter with nothing but a joke of an inheritance, wait until you see what they really hid behind that canvas and how it blew up every lie my family ever built. The next morning, I drove out to my parents' house in the same battered electric sedan my brother's firm technically owned, the one he liked to act as if I should be grateful to borrow. The security gate recognized the license plate and slid open with that soft mechanical hum that used to feel like coming home and now just sounded like a system reminding me I didn't belong. Inside, the place looked like a showroom. Fresh flowers on the foyer table, polished floors, no trace of the medical equipment or pill bottles that had cluttered every corner during those last months. Only one thing felt familiar. Patricia, our housekeeper since I was 10, stepping out from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand. "Ashley," she breathed, rushing toward me like I was the one who died and come back. She hugged me so tight my ribs AHD. I saw the papers from the lawyer. "It's not fair, Mika. Your mother would never." She stopped herself, eyes darting to the stairs where boxes were already stacked. Mover's tape crisscrossed over the Brooks name on the labels. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see this," she said instead. I tried to shrug it off, but the words lodged in my throat. "I'm just here for the painting," I said. Silent Tides from her office. At the mention of it, something flickered across Patricia's face. "She loved that thing," Patricia said quietly as we walked down the hallway. The last year, she would sit in front of it for hours. Sometimes she'd talk to herself, little phrases, code patterns, tides turning. I thought maybe it was the medication. We reached my mother's office, the door still half closed like she might be inside working. The desk was cleared, the bookshelves half empty. Only the painting remained, hanging on the wall above where her monitors used to glow late into the night. Silent Tides was larger than I remembered, a storm of deep blues and muted grays, blocks of color that at first glance looked like waves under moonlight. Up close, though, the pattern felt too deliberate. The way the squares lined up, the repetition of certain shapes. It looked less like random brush strokes and more like data visualized on a canvas, a heat map, a grid, something my designer brain was wired to decode. "She'd sit there," Patricia said softly behind me, pointing to the worn leather chair, staring at this, tapping her pen and whispering about numbers and currents. "Your father hated it. Said it was a waste of wall space." I lifted the frame carefully, surprised by its weight, and carried it out to the car. Standing in the driveway, I glanced back at the house that now belonged to my brother, the man who told me that painting was all I deserved. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I set the canvas gently in the back seat. A text from an unknown number popped up. "This is Robert. We should talk about your future. I can find you a small role at the firm. Family discount. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an offer to slot me into his empire like an afterthought." I locked the screen without replying and drove back to my apartment on the east side of Austin, a cramped loft that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. My safe little bubble far from my family's glass towers. I propped Silent Tides against the wall opposite my desk, turning on the overhead track lights. Under the bright LEDs, the painting changed. The blues and grays broke into tiny segments, lines and blocks forming patterns that made my fingers itch for a stylus. I opened my laptop, pulled up a browser, and searched the artist's signature in the corner. Nothing but a handful of dead links and a closed gallery in another state. No interviews, no portfolio, no social media. It was as if the artist had existed just long enough to create this one thing for my mother, then vanished. I tried scanning the painting with a QR reader on my phone as a joke, angling the camera this way and that, but the app stayed blank, unresponsive. Still, as I sat there alone with that worthless inheritance staring back at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother hadn't spent her final nights obsessing over a random piece of art. Something was buried in those colors, in those lines. And for the first time since the will was read, I wondered if my parents had really left me nothing, or if this painting was a key I just hadn't learned to use yet. It was almost midnight when I finally stopped pretending to work and admitted I'd been staring at Silent Tides more than my screen for hours. My apartment was quiet except for the tired rattle of the AC unit and the occasional whoosh of a car rolling past outside, headlights sliding briefly across the wall. The painting caught the glow from my monitor, blocks of color shimmering like broken code instead of waves. I grabbed the small UV flashlight I kept in my desk drawer for checking print proofs and security features on design samples, turning it over in my hand while my heart did this uneven stutter in my chest. On impulse, I killed the overhead lights, plunging the room into shadow, leaving only the faint blue from my laptop and the thin purple beam of UV as I stepped closer to the canvas. At first, nothing happened. Just the same blues and grays, the same neat grid of brushstrokes I'd seen 100 times in my memory of my mother's office. But when I tilted the flashlight, sweeping slowly from corner to corner, thin lines began to bloom across the surface, faint and ghostly, like veins under skin. My breath caught in my throat. I moved the light again, slower this time, hands trembling, and there it was, a broken square, then another. Then, a pattern resolving itself into something my brain recognized instantly. Pixels, modules, a code block, but painted. My heart started pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. "No way," I whispered, repositioning the beam with both hands. Under UV, hidden in the darkest pigments, a fragmented QR code emerged, not printed, but painted with microscopic precision, like someone had hidden a tech conference inside an art gallery. I fumbled for my phone, fingers suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat, and opened the scanner again. This time, I framed only the UV-lit sections, adjusting the angle and distance until the whole pattern came together. The app hesitated for a heartbeat, the little loading circles spinning just long enough to make me think I'd imagined it, and then a soft ding cut through the silence. A link popped up on my screen. It wasn't some public web page or random spam. It was a secure portal with a familiar logo and name, an institutional bank I knew from headlines and my parents' old conversations, the kind of place that handled serious money for serious people who didn't wait in line. My thumb hovered, then tapped. A login field appeared, already filled with my email address like it had been waiting for me specifically. Below it, a prompt glowed. "Secondary key required." I stared at it. Pulse lodged somewhere between my ribs and my teeth. Secondary key. My gaze drifted from the phone to the back of the frame like my mother was physically tugging my attention where she wanted it. I set my phone down, turned the painting around, and ran my fingers along the rough wood edges. One side felt slightly thicker than the others, just enough to be wrong. I dug my nails into the seam until a small strip of wood popped loose with a tiny crack, revealing a narrow compartment carved into the frame. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, my name written across the front in my mother's tight looping handwriting that I hadn't seen in ink since she signed hospital forms. For a second, I just held it, feeling the soft give of the paper, the weight of all the things she'd never said to my face pressing down on my chest. Then I tore it open with shaking fingers. "Ashley," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to say everything while I was still here." Her words spilled across the page, explaining how she'd realized years ago that the firm my father and brother built was rotting from the inside, that the algorithms she designed to predict market movement had been twisted into tools for fraud, for hiding money offshore, for stealing from people who trusted them enough to sign on the dotted line. She couldn't go public without proof, and she couldn't trust anyone inside Brooks Equity Group. So, she did what she did best. Collected data, documented everything, and built a trail no one else could see. "Your father believed you were too soft." She wrote, "Your brother believed you were too small, but you see patterns they never will. That's why the key is yours." The QR code in the painting, she explained, was the first key, a way to get to the vault without leaving a digital fingerprint. The second was a passphrase only I would know. Something she'd said to me every time I wanted to quit growing up, when math got too hard, or I felt like the odd one out in my own family. I could almost hear her voice in my head as I read it. I whispered the phrase now, barely audible in the dark apartment, and typed it into the field on my phone. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then the portal opened. File after file loaded on the screen, spreadsheets, transaction logs, shell companies, email chains, account numbers routed through jurisdictions I recognized from articles about tax havens, charts that mapped cash flows in lines that looked sickeningly like the patterns in my mother's models. One document made my stomach flip: a trust in my name, funded quietly over the years with money my mother had peeled away from the storm. Money, she insisted in the letter, had been rightfully earned before everything went wrong. There were also signed statements time-stamped that she'd already provided these to an attorney and initiated a confidential inquiry with federal investigators. The painting wasn't just art. It was a map, a key, a confession turned into data, proof that my family's success story was built on crimes. My chest felt too tight, my mind racing ahead to what this meant. What Robert and my father had done, what Margaret had risked, how long she'd carried this alone. I barely heard the first knock over the noise in my head. It was the second one that made me jump louder, harder, rattling the thin door of my apartment in its frame. I froze, phone in hand, heart slamming into overdrive. Then came the third, followed by my brother's voice, muffled but unmistakable, seeping through the wood like smoke. "Ashley, open the door." Another voice layered over his, sharper and higher, edged with anger. "Aunt Linda's. We know you have it," she snapped. Someone jiggled the handle hard enough to make the lock clack. "Open up now." Cold spread through my veins, washing away the last of the denial. They shouldn't even know I'd picked up the painting yet. The will had barely settled, and I hadn't told anyone where I lived, unless they were tracking the car. Of course, they were. That sedan was still corporate property. Corporate property with corporate GPS that I'd stupidly thought of as a perk, not a leash. My phone buzzed with a new text as the pounding continued. "Robert again. Don't be stupid. That painting belongs to the firm. Give it back and we can make this go away." I backed away from the door, every instinct screaming at me to stay quiet, clutching the frame of Silent Tide so hard my fingers aced HD and my knuckles went white. On my screen, the files from the secret vault glowed like a confession. Line after line of numbers that could burn their empire down. Outside, my family kept hammering at the wood, voices overlapping as they yelled for me to give back what they had spent years hiding. In that moment, it hit me with brutal clarity. This wasn't just a painting they were after. It was the key that could unlock everything they'd built on lies. The one thing they hadn't managed to control, and somehow, almost by accident, but also by design, I was the one holding it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Silent Tides propped in front of me like a shield, while the glow from my laptop washed over the dark room. Every instinct I had screamed at me to panic, to shove the painting in a closet and pretend I'd never seen any of it. Instead, I forced my shaking fingers to move. First, I downloaded everything from the hidden portal, every file my mother had buried in that code. Spreadsheets, email threads, contracts, transaction logs. I compressed them, encrypted them with a password only I would remember, then uploaded backups to multiple cloud accounts. When that was done, I sent a single message to the one person my mother said she trusted in her letter. "Michael, this is Ashley. I found what she left me." His reply came faster than I expected for someone who handled my family's messes. "Do not share those files with anyone else. Can you talk on a secure line?" 15 minutes later, I was huddled against the kitchen counter, phone wedged to my ear, staring at the door like it might explode inward. James's Snort's voice was calm but sharper than it had been in the conference room. I told him about the painting, the QR code, the portal, the trust in my name. I told him about the knocking, about Robert and Linda at my door, about the GPS in the sedan. On the other end, he exhaled slowly. "Your mother came to me months ago," he said. "She gave me a portion of those records and instructed me to prepare for the possibility you'd find the rest. She believed your father and brother were using her models to commit large-scale fraud. She also believed you were the only one she could trust to finish what she started." My chest tightened. "So you knew?" I asked. "Not the details," he said. "What I knew is that she opened a confidential inquiry with federal investigators. I helped her set up the trust in your name using funds she could document as legitimately earned early on. What you have now likely fills in the gaps. But listen to me carefully. If Robert and Linda are already at your door, they know that painting isn't just sentimental. They will try to get it back, and they will try to spin this as you stealing company property." I glanced at Silent Tides, the edges of the frame digging into the carpet. "What do I do?" I whispered. "First, get out of there," he said. "That apartment is compromised. Second, you need independent counsel on the tax and securities side. Someone who doesn't have any prior association with your family. I can give you referrals, but you have to move quickly." After we hung up, I didn't even change clothes. I slipped my laptop into my bag, grabbed my external hard drive, wrapped Silent Tides in an old blanket, and moved as quietly as I could. The hallway outside my door was silent now, but the memory of their pounding still vibrated in my bones. I eased the painting down the stairwell instead of risking the elevator, half expecting Robert to step out of the shadows. No one did. In the parking lot, the corporate sedan sat under a flickering streetlight like bait. James's warning echoed in my head. If I took it, I might as well send them a live location. I opened a rideshare app instead, booked a car, and stood there, hugging the blanket, wrapped painting, until a dented hatchback pulled up to the curb. The driver glanced at it in the rearview mirror as I slid in. "Moving day," he joked. "Something like that," I said. I had him drop me 3 blocks away from my place at a 2-4-hour coffee shop with good Wi-Fi and no questions asked. Inside, the air smelled like burnt espresso and old sugar. I claimed a booth in the back, set Silent Tides beside me, and opened my laptop again. Using a private browser, I searched for tax fraud attorney Austin Independent, scanning reviews and firm websites through gritty, sleep-deprived eyes. I found one that looked both small enough to care and big enough to be dangerous, then filled out the emergency contact form with a brief message. Whistleblower, family investment firm. Evidence in hand. Need confidential consult as up. While I waited, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Robert, but Patricia. My heart twisted. I answered, with my eyes already stinging. "You okay?" she whispered, skipping any greeting. I could hear the creak of our old kitchen chairs behind her, the familiar clink of dishes. "I'm safe," I said. "For now." They tore apart your mother's office. She rushed on. Robert and Linda, files everywhere. They were yelling about a painting, asking if I'd seen you take it. They said you were confused, that you might misunderstand something you found. They're scared, Ashley. I haven't seen them scared before. A cold, strange steadiness settled over me. "Good," I said before I could stop myself. "Let them be scared for once." Patricia hesitated. "I don't know what your mother put in that painting," she said, voice thick. "But she told me If anything happens to me and Ashley starts asking questions, tell her to keep going no matter what they say. So, keep going, mija. Don't let them talk you into dropping this. I blinked hard, wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and promised her I would be careful. Before sunrise, I booked a small furnished place near Lake Austin under a different last name, using a temporary credit card number and a burner email. The host left the key in a lockbox by the door. I carried Silent Tides inside like it was made of glass and leaned it against a wall in the tiny living room. The space was quiet, anonymous, smelling faintly of detergent and dust. For the first time since the will reading, I felt like I could breathe. In the pale morning light, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, phone in one hand, the attorney's referral list in the other. I could run. I could pretend I'd never seen those files, hand the painting back, and let my brother's empire roll on, built on stolen money and buried lies. Or I could do what my mother designed this entire insane puzzle for me to do. I looked over at Silent Tides, at the invisible code stitched into its colors, the secrets that had driven her to work late nights under that cold blue light. My family had decided all I deserved was a painting. They'd spent years underestimating me, counting on me to stay quiet, to stay small. They were about to find out what happened when the girl they pushed out learned she was holding the one thing that could bring them all down. 2 days later, I was sitting at the tiny kitchen table in the lake house, laptop open, when my new attorney, a tax and security specialist named Susan Harris, finished scrolling through the last file I'd sent her. We were on a video call, her face framed by bookshelves and degrees. "This is not small, Ashley," she said finally. "This is systemic. Your mother did thorough work. Between what she gave her lawyer and what you pulled from that portal, there's enough here to justify a full-scale investigation." My heart thudded. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "I've already reached out to the federal contacts Michael mentioned." She said, "Your mother filed formal complaints months ago. They opened a preliminary case, but they were missing key links. What you have ties the scheme to specific accounts and decision-makers. They've been waiting for this. I'm sending a secure package as we speak. You are not to meet with your brother or aunt alone. You are not to surrender the original painting under any circumstance. You keep copies of everything off-site." Understood. I promised I would, even as a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. After the call ended, I walked into the living room and stared at Silent Tides. It leaned against the wall opposite the sliding glass doors, the morning light turning its blues, almost silver. Somewhere inside that grid of color was the reason my mother had worked herself sick and slept in this house alone while the rest of us pretended everything was normal. My phone buzzed. A notification from Susan. Package received on their end. They may move fast. If anyone contacts you, call me and read immediately. I was still reading the message when someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp, confident raps that didn't belong to a delivery driver or a nervous Airbnb host. I went completely still. The knock came again, louder. "Ashley, open up. We need to talk." Robert's voice slid under the wood like oil. My brain raced. I hadn't used the company car. I'd booked this place under a different name. Used a virtual card. Then I remembered who used to pay for my phone plan, who'd insisted on location services after I moved out, framed as concern. "Just in case you get stranded," he'd said. I cursed under my breath for not changing it sooner. "Ashley," he called again more forcefully. "We can hear you in there." Linda's voice cut in tight with anger. "You can open the door, or we can make this very unpleasant for you." My hands shook, but I forced them to move. I grabbed my laptop, opened a secure call with Susan and James, and hit record on my phone, dropping it mic side up on the coffee table. Then I walked to the door and flicked the deadbolt. I didn't open it wide, just enough to see their faces. Robert looked like he'd stepped straight out of a press photo. Tailored shirt, expensive watch, every hair in place. Only his eyes betrayed him, a little too bright, a little too wild. Linda stood beside him in a structured blazer, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. "You found something," Robert said without preamble, eyes sliding past me to scan the room. "We need to come in." "This is a rental," I said. "I'm not supposed to have unregistered guests." He smiled, that smooth, patronizing expression he'd perfected over years of boardrooms and investor meetings. "Come on, Nat. Let's not do this. You took a company asset without permission. You accessed confidential systems you had no right to touch. I'm here trying to solve this as family before it becomes messy." He leaned on the word, letting it hang. Behind him, Linda's gaze snapped to silent tides as soon as she spotted it. Her face went white, then red. "There!" she hissed, pushing past me before I could stop her. "I told you she'd taken it." I stepped back, keeping my distance, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You left it to me," I said. "In the will. Remember? We left you something to remember, Mom." Robert shot back. "We did not give you permission to break into encrypted systems, steal proprietary models, and misinterpret complex financial data you don't understand." He moved closer, closing the space between us, dropping his voice. "Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're playing with?" I held his stare. "I understand fraud," I said quietly. "I understand shell companies and offshore accounts and using Mom's algorithms to manipulate markets. I understand stolen pension funds and doctored investor reports. I understand that Mom was building a case and that you tried to bury her with it." For a split second, something like panic flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a practiced look of disappointment. "Snorts, Margaret was sick," he said. "She got paranoid at the end, started seeing patterns where there weren't any. You, of all people, should know how that works. You live in your head. You see shapes and everything." Linda snorted. "You think the SEC is going to take seriously a bunch of colored blocks your mother painted on a canvas?" she demanded. "This is delusion, Ashley. Dangerous delusion. You're putting the firm at risk. You're putting our investors at risk." "Your investors are already at risk," I said. "Because you stole from them." Robert sighed like I was a stubborn child. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You give us the painting and every copy of whatever you downloaded. In return, we set up a generous settlement for you. Cash, no questions asked. You walk away, start that little design studio you always wanted, and no one ever needs to know how close you came to blowing up your family's life." Or, he added, his tone hardening, "you dig in and this becomes public investigations, headlines. You get painted as the ungrateful daughter trying to shake down her dead father's company. Aye, you think your portfolio is going to matter when Google auto-completes your name with fraud and lawsuit?" My stomach nodded, but I didn't look away. "You're already under investigation," I said. "Mom made sure of it. All I did was finish the trail," she started. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Please, you think if there were a real case, anyone would have waited this long. You have files you don't understand, and mommy issues. That's it." I took a breath, grounding myself in the weight of the phone recording on the table, in the soft ping I'd heard earlier when our conference call connected. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I don't understand everything. That's why I hired people who do." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, raising my voice just enough, "that everything you're saying right now, the offers, the threats, the way you just admitted the painting, is a company asset tied to confidential systems. My attorneys are hearing every word." Silence dropped into the room like a stone. Robert's gaze flicked to my laptop, the small green icon glowing on the screen. Linda blanched. "You didn't," she whispered. "You didn't get outsiders involved." "Mom did," I corrected. "Months ago, I'm just the one holding the key." As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. This one was firm, official, accompanied by a voice that made every hair on my arms stand up. "Federal agents." The man called Miss Brooks. "This is Special Agent William. We have a warrant to execute regarding Brooks Equity Group. Please open the door." Robert's face drained of color. "You called them here," he hissed. "I didn't have to," I said, stepping past him toward the door. "They've been waiting for this." When I opened it, 2 agents stood on the porch, flanked by a local officer. One of them held up a folder with my name and my parents' names on the front. "Brooks," he said, scanning the room behind me. His gaze snagged on Robert and Linda. "We're here to take possession of evidence and serve warrants related to an ongoing financial crimes investigation." Everything seemed to move in slow motion after that. The agent reading Robert his rights. Linda arguing, then stumbling over her own words as she tried to explain why they'd followed me here. the officer asking me to confirm my identity and the existence of the files. My hands trembled as I pointed out the encrypted drive, the painting, the letter my mother wrote. Somewhere in the chaos, Robert turned to me, eyes blazing, mask finally ripped away. "You think you've won?" he spat as an agent guided his hands behind his back. "You think they'll thank you for this when the dust settles? You destroyed our family." I met his glare, heart pounding but steady. "You did that yourself," I said. "All I did was turn on the light. News doesn't move slowly when it smells blood in the water. And in our case, it moved like a feeding frenzy." Within a week of that morning at the lake house, headlines started popping up on every local business site and then on national outlets. My family name shoved into bold fonts and harsh thumbnails. Brooks Equity Group under federal investigation. CEO detained on fraud and tax evasion charges. Whistleblower evidence points to massive scheme. My phone lit up with notifications I didn't open and numbers I didn't recognize, reporters and distant acquaintances suddenly very interested in my life. I watched it all unfold on my laptop from yet another temporary rental. The volume of the TV low, my name blurred in early reports as a family member who provided key documentation like I was a footnote in my own story. At the arraignment, Robert stood in a navy suit that suddenly looked like a costume, flanked by attorneys who blinked into cameras and talked about misunderstandings, complex strategies, and overzealous regulators targeting a successful firm. The charges read out loud made that spin sound pathetic. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, counts stacking up like sandbags against a breaking dam. Linda tried to keep her composure, but the day agents walked out of Brooks Equity with boxes of files and seized servers. Cameras caught her with her head in her hands at the curb. Mascara smudged. The polished CFO mask finally cracked. Their investors, the ones they'd treated like faceless account numbers, suddenly had voices, and those voices were angry and very, very public. Lawsuits started piling up. A group of retirees who'd trusted Brooks Equity with their savings appeared in a news segment sitting at folding tables in a community center, holding printouts of statements that no longer meant anything. I watched one man in his 70s say, "I believed in them. I believed the returns were real," and felt a sharp, ugly twist of guilt in my chest. Even though I hadn't signed a single one of those fraudulent reports that night on a call, Susan's tone softened for the first time since I'd hired her. "You didn't create this," she said firmly. "You put a stop to it. There's a difference, and it matters, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." In court, months later, when the plea deal finally came after endless motions and press speculation, Robert didn't look at me once. He stared straight ahead as the judge accepted his agreement. Over a decade in federal prison, millions in restitution, a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company, his right to play the respectable CEO permanently revoked. Linda took a lesser sentence in exchange for cooperation, but she lost everything else. Her position, her license, the house she'd bragged about buying with clean money, the invitations to charity galas she loved so much. Brooks Equity Group, the empire they'd built on my mother's work and other people's trust, was dismantled piece by piece. Assets frozen, then liquidated to pay back as much as possible. The trust my mother set up for me was examined from every angle and ultimately deemed clean after investigators traced every deposit. "Your mother was cautious," James told me in his office, tapping a thick folder with my name on it. "She documented the source of every dollar. This is as legitimate as it gets. Ashley, she wanted you protected. I could have taken the money and disappeared to some quiet town where no one knew the word Brooks. Instead, sitting at another too-small table in another rented place, I opened a spreadsheet and started moving numbers around the way my mother used to, but for a different purpose. First, I authorized a significant chunk to go straight into the restitution pool earmarked specifically for smaller investors, the retirees, the teachers, the families who trusted the Brooks name because they thought it meant safety. Watching that transfer confirm on the screen felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The rest I used to do, something my brother would have laughed at if he'd still been free. I incorporated my own company. Tideshift Studio started as a name on a form, a basic website, and a logo I sketched on a napkin at a diner. Within a year, it was a real office space in a modest building in East Austin with secondhand desks, mismatched chairs, a coffee machine that groaned every morning, and a wall painted the same deep blue as Silent Tides. We specialized in UX and data visualization for fintechs, nonprofits, and community banks. But our unofficial mission was simpler and sharper. Make it harder for people like my brother to hide behind pretty dashboards and confusing reports. We built tools that made risk obvious, that translated complex numbers into stories regular people could understand before they signed anything. We said no more than once to potential clients whose pitch decks felt too slick. Patricia was there from day one, sitting at the front desk with a second-hand laptop, answering phones in that warm voice that had narrated my childhood. "Welcome to Tideshift," she'd say, offering visitors coffee in mismatched mugs. And every time I heard it, something in me settled a little more. On the day we hung Silent Tides in the conference room, right where clients would see it when they walked in, I ran my fingers along the frame and thought about the woman who'd hidden a nuclear bomb of truth inside a painting because she didn't trust anyone else to carry it. "We should get a plaque," Patricia joked, stepping back to admire it in memory of rich men's secrets. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. The sound shocking and then comforting in my own ears. Revenge didn't look like I thought it would. There was no slow clap, no cinematic moment where Robert fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness under a spotlight. The satisfaction was quieter, steadier, more practical. It was watching the balance of power tilt, seeing his name in articles warning young entrepreneurs what not to do, hearing a retired teacher say in a workshop we hosted, "For the first time, I actually understand where my money is." It was signing paychecks with my name at the bottom instead of watching someone else hoard credit. It was walking past that painting every morning, knowing that the thing my family had mocked as all I deserved had become the key to dismantling their lies and building something better, cleaner, and fully mine in their place. 2 years later, if you walked into Tideshift on a random Tuesday, you'd never guess our origin story started with a worthless painting and a federal raid that blew my last illusions to pieces. You'd see a small team huddled around whiteboards arguing about how to make disclosures clearer for a nonprofit or how to redesign a banking app so people could actually understand the risks they were taking before they clicked agree. You'd see tired coffee cups, a snack drawer that never stayed full, sticky notes clinging to monitors, and a conference room with a single piece of art on the wall. Silent Tides, framed and steady, watching over everything we built like a quiet witness. We'd grown slowly, the way I liked it, one cautious contract at a time. We hosted free workshops for freelancers, teachers, and retirees on how to read financial reports, brought in guest speakers to talk about scams and too good to be true returns, and printed simple checklists people could take home and stick on their refrigerators. Sometimes during Q&A, someone would ask, "How did you get into this?" And I'd feel that familiar knot in my chest, the collision of past and present. I'd give them the short version. My family ran a firm. Things weren't what they seemed. My mom was braver than anyone knew. The long version belonged in court transcripts and investigative files, not on a projector screen in a community center. A podcast host finally convinced me to tell more of it, framing it as a cautionary tale about money, trust, and what happens when loyalty is weaponized. Sitting in that recording studio with foam panels on the walls and a mic in front of me, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I could say fraud and prison and my brother in the same sentence without feeling like I was betraying someone. The betrayal had already happened. I was just refusing to keep it quiet. Robert wrote twice from prison. The first letter was angry, messy, full of excuses and half-truths, blaming me for everything from his sentence to the headlines, insisting that family should stick together even while he dodged responsibility. The second, months later, was quieter, written in tighter script, full of words like regret, mistakes, and maybe we could talk when I get out. I read it at my desk under the soft wash of afternoon light, Silent Tides in the corner of my eye, then folded it back up and put it in a drawer with the first. I wasn't interested in rewriting history for him or playing the part of the understanding little sister who helped him feel better about what he'd done. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be about freeing myself from carrying his choices on my back, not absolving him in his own story. What mattered more was what we did with the wreckage. Now, making sure fewer people got fooled by glossy brochures and charming CEOs, teaching anyone who would listen that numbers tell stories if you know how to read them, and that blind trust is not a requirement for being a good person. Some nights, when the office was quiet and everyone had gone home, I'd sit alone in the conference room looking at the brushstrokes that once hid my mother's last act of defiance. Sometimes I'd think about visiting her grave and telling her how it all turned out, about the workshops, about the retired nurse who cried because she finally understood her statement, about the intern who said she wanted to work in finance, but not the gross kind. My parents had tried to split their legacy like it was cleanly divisible. Money and power for the son they thought would carry their name, a consolation prize for the daughter they believed would fade into the background. They were wrong on both counts. That consolation prize blew the truth wide open, and the girl they underestimated refused to disappear. Instead, she built something honest from the ashes of their lies and invited other people inside. So now, when someone tells me they feel small, overlooked, like they've only ever been handed leftovers in their own family or career, I think about that day in the lawyer's office and the way my brother smirked when he said, "That's all you deserve." And I want to ask them the same question I had to ask myself in the middle of all that noise and fear. What if the thing everyone else thinks is nothing, the part of you they dismiss, the scraps they toss your way, the skill or perspective they don't value, is actually the key you've been holding all along, waiting for you to turn it and walk through a door they never imagined you'd open pen?